Daniel Williams ydw I, cyfarwyddwr canolfan Richard Burton. I'm Daniel Williams, Director of the Richard Burton Centre for the Study of Wales here at Swansea. Before we begin, let me just make some thank yous to Elaine Canning and Matthew Hughes, who's behind in the back there with a camera, who've helped with the arrangements of all this event, and Sian Williams of the Burton Archive, who always helps with all things Richard Burton. The Taliesin Arts Centre, who is hosting the event for the first time this year. So it's lovely to be in this great venue. We undermine how great a setting it is here on campus. So thank you to the team and for allowing us to show a series of Branwen's films in the weeks leading up to this lecture. That's been greatly appreciated. Eve Johnson and Megan Jones, PhD students in the English department, have also been willing to help, and I see various members of the Burton board are with us here tonight. Angela John, Branwen Okpako of the Rich History Project, and Robin Weiner, our librarian. Our greatest thanks every year, even when she's not here, is to Sally Burton, who has endowed the lecture series and is always immensely supportive of the work of the centre and the activities around the archive. And it's always an honour to have you with us, Sally. Before introducing Branwen Okpako, let me, as is by now something of a convention, say a few words, ones that I haven't said before, I hope, about Richard Burton. I'll start with his diary. It's 1971, but he's recalling how he was feeling a decade earlier. And he says, "The fact is that I was in a very enviable position. Though I was knocked about by the press, British press particularly, for being a bloated millionaire and a traitor to my country for deserting a sinking British empire on which the sun was at last setting, I was more courted than almost any actor in the world." And Richard Burton today is perhaps remembered as an actor of that late, dwindling imperial moment. I don't know how many of you here will have watched And Just Like That, the recent sort of sequel to Sex and the City. I'm confessing that I have here. But Charlotte York, which as her name implies, is the most straight-laced, staid, and Anglo-Saxon of the characters, names her two dogs in the most recent series, Richard Burton and Elizabeth Taylor. The names evoking her waspish nostalgia for the 1950s and its attitudes and its fashions. Richard Burton has, it seems, become the embodiment of a certain kind of nostalgia for an era before the waning authority of the status of Britain and Britishness, before decolonization, if you like. Yet his own reference to the sun at last setting on empire suggests that this is not really how he viewed himself. The diary entry following an encounter with the African-American novelist James Baldwin, who asked Burton for money, reads, "We all, as I said before, owe Baldwin a living, because he is black and we are white." And then he adds, well, off-white. He states elsewhere that "I reject the mass lumping of races together from my teens in Oxford and the RAF. Taffy was a Welshman, Taffy was a thief. It's like the myth of the fighting Irish and the avaricious Jew. In general, I found him to be generous to the point of folly." Now, there's obviously plenty to question about his self-description as off-white. At its worst, it's a form of crude appropriation and self-dramatization. But the identification with minorities is a characteristic of his diary and his essay writing, as is a critique of dominant forms of Britishness and empire. It derives, for those of us who are familiar with the culture, from a particular Welsh perspective. When that perspective moved from diary to essay, from private to public, it could cause him some trouble. While playing the role of Winston Churchill for a television series in 1974, the New York Times invited Richard Burton to write a piece on the wartime Prime Minister. This is some of what he had to say. "I realize afresh that I hate Churchill and all his kind. I hate them virulently, They have stalked down the corridors of endless power all through history. What sane man, for instance, bred in the bone by sentiments of honor and fair-mindedness, could have said of the Germans in 1939, when Churchill became First Lord of the Admiralty, they must bleed and burn, they must be crushed into a mass of smouldering ruins? Was it a simple exercise in hyperbole, or was it what he actually meant? What man of sanity could say on hearing of the atrocities committed by the Japanese against British and Aznak prisoners of war, "We shall wipe them out, every one of them, men, women, and children. There shall not be a Japanese left on the face of the earth"? How could he have ordered the enchanting and innocent city of Dresden razed to ruins? For what reason did he do it? Did he think the people of Dresden would turn out to fight the overpowering might of the Allied juggernaut with shards of Dresden dolls and scar the tanks and armored cars? Now, these words remain controversial. Just this Sunday, Grant Shapps, Secretary of State for Defense, was defending the bombardment of Gaza by noting that, I quote, "When Britain bombed Dresden, 35,000 people lost their lives. We've sort of forgotten that in war, very sadly, people lose their lives." Burton's lacerating attack on the genocidal fantasies of the British ruling class in his essay on Churchill led to uproar. But the COVID inquiry has established that in September 2020, that self-styled Churchillian, Boris Johnson, rejected a further lockdown by suggesting that his government should let the bodies pile high. As we near his centenary, Richard Burton ceases to be the voice of 1950s nostalgia and continues to speak to us with some force and relevance today. Now, speaking with some force and relevance brings me to our speaker tonight, who has chosen film as her medium of communication through her career. I've touched on the legacies of empire, on race, on Germany, and on Wales, all themes that feature in different ways in the work of Branwen Okpako. I'm expecting Branwen to talk about her background and career a bit, so I won't say much here. Born in Nigeria, having spent many years in Berlin, she's currently a professor at the University of California, Davis. A number of her films explore questions of ethnicity and identity in Germany, while The Education of Auma Obama is a moving documentary portrait of the Kenyan feminist and activist and half-sister of Barack Obama. The recent return to Chibok that some of you watched here on Monday is an adaptation of Habila's book, The Chibok Girls, which Branwen will talk about tonight. Her early short documentary, Searching for Taid, traces her brother's journey to Wales to meet with relatives and friends of their deceased Welsh grandfather, William Williams. All Edore, Branwen's brother, has of his Taid is a tattered photograph, and the film is a meditation on the documentary form itself, while also exploring transnational lines of connection, xenophobia, and the hidden secrets that lie behind the surfaces of family life and national imagined communities alike. Branwen was last in Swansea at a conference in 2007, and we've remained in touch ever since. I admire her work immensely, and it's a great privilege to invite Branwen Okpako to deliver this year's Richard Burton Annual Lecture. Branwen.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy and proud, actually, to be here and to be invited to do this, and I hope I manage. So let me just get started, because I've got loads of slides. And yeah, this is the description that was on the poster about what I'm going to talk about. And so I'm just going to look and read it and see if I've covered everything. So it says, Wales, Nigeria, and cinema, the Berlin years. Okay, that covers all the countries, almost. It doesn't have the United States there yet. Branwen Okpako will evaluate how the experience of making the film about her Welsh heritage, Searching for Taid, 1998, defined her aesthetic and filmmaking style. Okay. Then the lecture will also weave in Branwen's personal relationship with the work of Richard Burton, with reference specifically to the film Cleopatra, 1963. And I already spoke to Mrs. Burton and said my references will be those of someone who is influenced by the work of this great artist and actor whose voice kind of was present all the time in my childhood because my mother, Kathleen Gwyneth, was a huge fan. And then it goes on to say, in cinema, notes Branwen, the audience is both the pilot and the passenger. And it's so amazing that here tonight is the son of a friend who participated in a film I made called The Pilot and the Passenger. And he's here this evening listening to this, so it's amazing. And my lecture is going to explore the role of cinema and the struggle to define oneself legibly in a society for whom one is invisible. Now, I want to claim that I sense myself as invisible, or I felt invisible very often growing up when I was interacting with cinema. But I want to say that we probably all feel invisible. I mean, what Daniel just said about what Richard Burton wrote about his experiences shows that he also felt invisible, even though he was so visible. So this invisibility that I'm describing is a complex one. It's not just that you're not on the screen. You know, even if you are on the screen, you can be invisible there. So yeah, Sir J. Eisenstein wrote that all art is about conflict, so that word struggle in there is always useful to put. It creates a bit of tension, and it evokes movement, and movement means life, so I'm glad that word is in there. Yeah, I wanted to say my thank yous as well, so let me not forget to do that. I want to say thank you to the Richard Burton Centre for inviting me. I want to say thank you to Daniel Williams. I want to say thank you to the Taliesin Art Centre for screening my films. I want to say thank you to the family of Richard Burton for thinking that my voice is somehow part of this. I really feel honoured and grateful. So let me move straight to the film that influenced me. This is an old poster. It's the poster that was hanging up in the University of Ibadan Staff Club the day they screened this film in the Staff Club. They used to have a weekly screening there when we were growing up at the University of Ibadan in Nigeria. And every week they would bring out the 16mm projector, and they would mount these two speakers in the trees opposite the swimming pool, and then on the screen they would project a film. And this film was projected, even though it was made in 1963, in the 70s when I was a child, and it made an impression on me, a big impression on all of us, actually. It was a really big, epic film. And I can't say it's the reason why I became a filmmaker, but all the films we watched there, the way we watched films, hearing the projector, you know, the sound of the projector, seeing the film, you know, passing by the lens and the light, and having that experience so visceral and physical, and sitting outside at night and being allowed out at night, all made cinema seem like an incredibly important and great experience. So that's Rex Harrison, Elizabeth Taylor, and Richard Burton on the poster. I had heard about Cleopatra, of course, as a child, and we had actually visited Cairo once so I had an idea about Egypt. But, and of course, I knew about Richard Burton because my mother spoke about him and had recordings of him reading Dylan Thomas poems. The film made a huge impact on me, as I've said. It was a huge film with real locations and hundreds of extras and an incredible sets, I mean amazing sets. Films are no longer made that way, and they will never be made that way again. It's not just because of AI, it's CGI, it's all kinds of reasons, but the actual need to embody life itself and to have hundreds of people actually be there, present, breathing, riding horses, moving around in order for the film to come to life is something that belongs to a bygone time. What resonated most to me, though, was the fact that this is a film about the relationship between the African continent and Europe. Elizabeth Taylor is playing an African queen. She's playing the queen of Egypt. And she's having this relationship with these Italians. And she's, first of all, she has two men, which to me was like, wow, she gets to have two men. And, you know, half of the film, she has Rex Harrison, and then the second half of the film, she has Richard Burton, and she's a hero. That was the first time I'd ever seen that, and I don't even think we see that very often anymore. So that was amazing. But what I'd already learned, even as a young child, was that, you know, even the love reminded me of my parents, because my mom is Welsh and my dad is Nigerian, and so the African continent, the European continent, kind of coming together, and they argued a lot, and they were very passionate, and that kind of reminded me of my parents. But, and also the way the story kind of weaves the personal and the political, that intrigued me, and I watched it again to prepare for this, and I thought that is something that I think I've carried, because all of my films do that. They are about people, individuals, usually a portrait of someone, but around them is something political, is something, some event, like my first feature-length film called Drekfresser, or I called it Dirt for Dinner in English, about the first black policeman from East Germany. Him coming up just as the wall was coming down, and the way Germany was trying to find its identity as a unified country. I kind of tied that to this man's personal story of his own childhood, growing up and everything. So this film kind of does that. And when Richard Burton in this film is he sings, I feel like he sings the blues a lot with his voice. He has a way of crying and speaking, but he's crying. It expressed to me emotions about him wanting to give up everything for this woman and to dishonor himself in a way for this woman, and it seemed so real to me, the way he embodied that. But what I used to do was, when I watched a film like that, is I would look around in the film for somebody who looks like me. Where am I in this? Okay, this is a film about Africa, so there's got to be lots of people from Africa in this film. But there weren't really many. But there was this one woman. So most of the films we watched in those days were American or British, and they seldom featured people of African descent in any significant way, Sidney Poitier being the big exception. From time to time, after these screenings in the University of Baden, the academics would be like up in arms sometimes and about the film selection, and it would be like the demeaning depiction of people of color, and there would be like, you could feel that this idea of representation and depiction was important. And even though I was a child, seeing the adults getting upset about this made me know that it meant something. And I certainly would like to find somebody on the screen that looked like me. So I watched the film and I searched for someone I could identify with who looked like me. I was not used to finding anyone, but this character stood out for me. Has anyone here watched this film? Cleopatra. Do you remember her? Does anyone remember her? She has one of the most important lines in the film, even. Her name, the actress, and she's like one of the only people who actually look like she could be Egyptian, right? Her name is Isabel Cooley, and she played the part of Charmaine. And Charmaine is apparently a real person, and she worked for Cleopatra as an assistant and did a lot of things to do with running the country, governmental work, and so on. So that character exists in the ancient text, and the character also exists in Shakespeare's Antony and Cleopatra. And yeah, she stuck out for me. So her name is Charmaine or Charmion, and apparently it's an ancient Greek word. This is them on the set, hanging out, the ones playing the maidens there. And even the way her hair is dressed, like you can imagine that's like really her hair. Like now those Egyptian hairstyles even look realistic on her head. But the name means apparently in ancient Greek source of delight, and it's spelled Karma, Kharma, And karma, as probably a lot of people know in Sanskrit, refers to the concept of action, work, or deed, and its effects and consequences. Interestingly, those lines of dialogue that Shakespeare gave this character, Charmion, in his play Antony and Cleopatra, are the character's reflections on the actions and consequences of her queen, Cleopatra. The question asked, and I'm sure the people who know the film will remember it now, the question is asked by the Roman general Agrippa, who comes in after Cleopatra has allowed a snake to bite her and kill her, poison her, and she's died and she's been dressed, for burial. And he comes in and he asks the only remaining companion who's alive, who's but dying, was this well done of your lady? And the Roman general asks, and her response is extremely well and befitting of the last of so many noble rulers. It's so interesting that her name means karma, and what her contribution to the story is a reflection on the actions of her maid. It also makes me think about, we were talking earlier with Eve about her PhD work and how people emerge as archetypes, and maybe she represents the karma of Cleopatra, and she becomes then the personification of that. But back to me and my actions and the consequences of the actions of my parents, namely our birth, but also the circumstances in which they came together. I'm going to show a clip of my first professional commission, which was made in 1998. It was a commission from Channel 4 UK, and it was produced by Mary Simmons from the cooperative Taliesin, which was founded by Colin Thomas and others. And it was a very personal film and dominated by, and I'm reading what was written on the BFI site, dominated by the gentle dignity and philosophical generosity of my brother, Edore Okpako. So it's a story about us kind of trying to find our roots in Wales. And it was my first work, so I've got a lot of criticisms of it now, and I would do everything differently, but it's what I did then. And it relates in the sense that we come to Wales to discover, or to confront perhaps North Wales and the family with the consequences of the actions both of my parents and then also of my grandfather, my Taid. So the film is called Searching for Taid, and I'm just going to show a little excerpt.
Hi. My name is Edore Okpako. I'm a Nigerian, but my mother is Welsh. I don't really know much about the Welsh part of my family. My sister is making this film about my search for my grandfather, or Taid in Welsh. She got the idea because my mum says that we look alike. I'm going to Wales today to try to find out what I can about him. I've got to rush because my flight's going soon. This is a list that my mum gave me of all our relatives and friends who should be able to tell me something about him and what he felt about me, African grandson and all that. Okay, so let's move.
All right, I'm not going to show the whole film. I'm going to show different clips, but that's how it begins, and that's what it's about. We actually filmed that little conversation there after we'd already been to Wales and filmed the whole film, but we needed something to start it with, so we came back and filmed that afterwards. But it was a very, I won't say harrowing experience, but it was a heart-rending experience to make this film, because what really got to us is that we were in a country that was our home, our motherland. And we kind of knew it because Mum used to bring us to Wales almost every year from Nigeria, so we kind of knew the place. And we knew about the fact that, my grandfather had disapproved of my mom marrying my dad and all those things. We had heard the stories. But, now when I watch the film, I think if my grandfather had lived longer, I would have maybe gotten the chance to talk to him and get to know him, and maybe his attitudes would have changed. But at that time, it was such a shock to him that his daughter, who had been raised as, you know, Welsh nonconformist in the chapel, and who was a good Christian who thought that everybody in the world was the same and there was no difference, had actually really thought that, and had actually just fallen in love with a guy and wanted to marry him. It came as a shock to him, and I think I think we were pretty respectful and sympathetic, those of you who saw it. But now I'm a grandmother myself, so I think I might have done it a little bit different. So, chwarae teg to my old Taid. Yeah, I was 28 when I made that film, and he died when I was 7 years old. So I never really got the chance. I inherited a relationship that my parents had, rather than having my own. And the story I'm telling there is basically more their story in a way than mine. And so perhaps I would do it differently today. We were there sort of sticking up for our mum and sticking up for our dad and saying, you know, that, yeah. So the next clip I'm going to show is an excerpt from the film I made in 2002. It was my first feature film. I talked about the first documentary I made, which was about this first black policeman in East Germany, and that film was my graduation film, and it did well because I think for the Germans it was a film about them, but they didn't immediately think it was about them because it was about an Afro-German, and at that time in the late 90s, just at the turn of the millennium, the idea of a multicultural German society had not yet really manifested itself, and it was still kind of. I remember going to the commissioning editor and saying I want to make a film about an Afro-German, and he was like, "You mean you want to make a film about a foreigner?" And I said, "No, he's German, but he's just half Cameroonian." He's like, "Yeah, but that means he's a foreigner." So now it's different, but then it was like that. So it was a great exercise in trying to use film as a way to do the thing that film does, which is to take everybody into a worldview, to turn off the lights and say, this is the world the way I see it, and to convince them to see the world the way you see it, and to identify with this character, this person, to such an extent that at the end of the film it could be their brother, or it could be their son, or it could be their person, that they would begin to see this person the way I saw them. And so that's made me fall in love with filmmaking a little bit more. But when I talk, and this is what I want to talk about in this talk, is what did I learn from searching for Taid? I'd certainly learned about respecting the protagonist, or the characters that you're trying to portray and tell their story. Because when you start with your own story, and you know how much it hurts, and you know how much you have to be, you have to be respectful, because as soon as you tell a story, that story, that version of events kind of obliterates every other version of events and becomes, the fact. So I learned that personally, because it was about people that I care a lot about. It was about my own very family. And so when I went on to make other films, I bore that in mind, and I tried to ask my protagonists to set themselves in scene the way they like, to dress how they want, to sit where they want, to talk about what they want, even though eventually I was the one who was going to tell the story, but I wanted it to be a kind of a work that we kind of did together, just because of the experience I had making this film about my own Taid. So this excerpt I'm going to show now is my first feature film that I made in 2003, and in it, it's about an Afro-German policewoman. I made her into a policewoman because I felt that the Afro-Germans have had this way of because very often, because of colonialism, because of World War II, because of certain experiences, they may have a parent from the African continent who they didn't know, who maybe came to Germany to study and then had to go back, or they had a parent whose father or mother was American and was stationed there after the Second World War and then had to go back. So there was really a community of Afro-Germans who did not know that side of them that was of African descent. and they would meet every year, and they would interact with each other. And one of the things they did was a workshop called Elternsuche, where people looked for their parent that was missing. And I attended one of those workshops in conjunction with the research I was doing about the previous film. And I thought they're like detectives. They're going out to go and dig in the past, to go and find out who they are. And because Germany was a country that had this past that people didn't really necessarily like digging into, because the past was the Nazis and World War II and all the bad things that happened, people tended to want to leave that alone. But these were Germans who were trying to dig and trying to find out because they had to know who they were. And so based on that experience, I wrote this film, and I made the main character into a detective. And here she is in this scene trying to kind of find out who she is. And even though it didn't happen to me like this, I grew up with both my parents, somehow being both European and African and being both Welsh and Nigerian puts you in a little bit of a, I don't know, other people here who are both Welsh and Nigerian. Incredibly, we have some today, so we can talk about it afterwards. But it kind of makes you not really belong anywhere, in a way, even though you belong in both places, and you also kind of don't belong. So this resonated with me.
Ich suche meine Mutter.
Wie heißt sie denn?
Das weiß ich nicht.
Sie wissen nicht, wie Ihre Mutter heißt. Na, seit wann ist sie denn hier?
Ich war hier. Ich bin hier aufgewachsen. Ich hatte gehofft, Sie könnten mir meine Geburtsurkunde zeigen.
Ach, nein, das ist hier kein Kinderheim mehr. Wissen Sie das nicht? Tja, tut mir leid, ich kann Ihnen leider nicht weiterhelfen, aber versuchen Sie es beim Bezirksamt.
Dankeschön. Darf ich mich ein bisschen umsehen?
Wenn sie nicht rechtzeitig aufstehen kann, dann soll sie im Bett bleiben.
Aber es sind doch jetzt schon 2 Wochen, allmählich.
Dieses Kind muss mehr als andere lernen, die Grenzen zu kennen. Sie wird es besonders hart haben. Dein Vater war ein böser Mann, der deiner Mutter sehr wehgetan hat.
Was machen Sie denn hier?
Entschuldigung, Schwester. Ich wollte nur mein Bett machen. Ich gehe sofort nach unten, Schwester. Bitte, Schwester.
Eva, gehen! Nicht rennen!
Ich esse brav den Teller leer. Den Löffel habe ich noch aus Kindheitstagen. 1 Happen für die Sonne, 2 für den Mond, 3 für die Unvernunft, 4 gegen die Einsamkeit, 5 gegen die Feigheit, 6 für die Liebe, 7 gegen die Schläge, 8 für den Regenbogen, 9 gegen Erniedrigungen, 10 für die Freiheit. Ich esse deine Suppe nicht. Nein, deine Suppe schmeckt mir nicht.
Oops, sorry, I'm going to play it again. So that's my next word, keyword, hiraeth. That's those of you who speak Welsh, which is a lot of you, I'm sure, is this sense of homesickness that is tinged with grief and sadness for something that's long departed. And it's something I grew up, my mother never used that word actually, she never spoke about it, but she had it. She had that longing. And it was almost like, okay, if you miss Wales so much, like why don't you live there? But it was almost like she wanted to be far enough away so that she could have the hiraeth, so that she could feel the longing for Wales. And it was almost as if you could see Wales clearer when you had that distance, and when you could feel it that way, that pain had to do with. But we were just talking about it before I started here with Daniel, and he was saying that, yeah, it's like that sense is something that you can have in Wales because there's something about the colonial experience or the experience of imperialism that kind of deprives you of your home even when you are in it. And so that's a sense that I understood from both of my parents. They both felt that the English had kind of taken away their culture and their language, and so they kind of had that in common, and that linked them, and it. I'm going to talk now a little bit about Richard Burton and the fact that he changed his name from Jenkins to Burton, and the reason, as the way I understand it, this is him standing together with his teacher, his acting teacher, Philip Burton, who apparently, I hope I'm correct, one of the things he coached him in was kind of getting rid of his Welsh accent and kind of getting a more neutralized accent in order to be able to succeed. And that is something that people from Nigeria will all know about, you know, that there's something, when we went to school, you weren't allowed to speak the so-called vernacular, which was whatever language was your language in school. It was like against the school rules. You could get into trouble for doing it. So education meant, in a way, emptying yourself of your culture and your identity and your language and your way of expression and adopting this new one in order to succeed. That was what education to an extent meant. And I feel as if I can imagine that Richard Burton, growing up as he did, you know, with a father who was a miner and having lots of brothers and sisters and being raised by his sister and having to experience the working class life and wanting to progress and knowing that progression is like, it costs something. You have to pay to progress and to have success. And the thing you pay with is your identity to an extent. And that, I think, I can sort of feel and imagine. I'm sure everybody knows this as well, because from the archive. But I found this and I thought, you know, this is a notice where he's saying that from a certain date, he's going to change his name and he's going to be adopted by another father from then his own. And again, that to me is also the colonial experience that, you know, the fathers who couldn't read and write, who had never gone to school and who only knew about traditional herbal medicine and things like that were just like, oh, you know, you're not important. My father is my teacher. My father is my, you know, the person who's going to teach me to belong to this new culture that is. And we lost a lot. We as Africans, this is my African side now, we lost a lot. My father used to talk about a wall between us and our history and our culture and our science and our religion. I mean, the things that make us us, the knowledge that gets lost when you're convinced that that is primitive and this is civilized. So I'm going to show now a clip from a film that I made in 2011 about Aoma Obama, who, as Daniel already said, is the sister of President Obama. And she actually happened to go to the same film school as me in Berlin. That's how I met her and made friends with her. But she was, at the same time that she was in film school in Berlin, she was in Heidelberg writing her PhD. And this was her PhD. In German, they call it Dr. Vater. So father, they actually used the word father. So this was her Dr. Vater. So again, you know, giving up your real father for the father that's going to make you progress. And it wasn't an easy relationship, and a lot of people writing their PhD probably have this sense that, you know, your Dr. Vater or mother is kind of, I don't know, we're in a university now, so I don't want to cause any conflict, but there can be I can imagine that there can be difficulties. She definitely had difficulties as well with the experience, but I just want to show you this clip because I'm not going to show you the whole thing, but he's the Dr. Vater talking about comparative cultural studies that he discovered having this student, particularly Auma Obama, who was from Kenya and who was extremely articulate and who was able to speak German very well and was studying German literature, but was also bringing her perspective. And he was amazed by this and fascinated by this, and they created this whole area of study about comparative German studies that changed the study of German at the University of Heidelberg. So it was a major thing. They wrote a big book, and it became a new discipline and so on. But yeah, I'm just going to play this clip about changing your name, about what you give up in order to assimilate into this dominant culture, etc.
So that was for me very interesting because it brought me down to the core of what being in Germany was around, was the fact that you're constantly confronted with who you are, where you come from, why do you think the way you do, why do you dress the way you do, why do you eat what you eat, you know, what does it mean to the other person, and do you want to change what you're doing so that you can be accepted? It all kind of became one.
For your sake, we're not wishing for rain, but I would love to experience a real deluge.
For your sake too, I'm not so sure that roof holds. Huh?
You don't think?
No, I think it has some holes in it.
Oh.
My dad decided I should pick up a language. My sister lived in Geneva, so go to Switzerland and learn. So I went to Switzerland, and I'm like, I've been in boarding school. I've been in school forever. I'm not going to learn no language. I'm going to travel in Europe. And that's what I did. I was like, oh, Uma's in Germany. I'm going to go see her. So I called her. I said, I'm in Europe. I'm coming. She's like, get on the bus. Come to Heidelberg. So I came to Heidelberg, and I found a very different Uma, you know, who was going out. We went dancing all the time. You know, we walked along the river, and we'd sing Miriam Makeba songs like we used to do on campus. Oh, we had a great time. She had settled. She bloomed. She bloomed in Germany. She was always Rita Obama. That is what she was in school. That was what she was at Kenyatta University. But once she was in Germany, she was like, Auma. I'd call her Rita, because that's what I'd be used to calling her. She's like, no, Auma. So, yeah, she was like, yes, I am Auma, and you have to call me Auma. Yeah.
But isn't that fascinating that you have to go sometimes so far away from where you come from to become yourself?
I think that it comes at a certain stage in your life when you realize who you are and you're proud of your identity. Don't forget, Rita is what her parents gave her.
Yeah, when she got to Germany and she found out that Rita is like a German name, she associated suddenly with the Germans, and then she thought, well, what's my name? And then she went back to her original name. So yeah, in that description of what I'm going to talk about, visibility obviously is one of the things that film can give you, maybe. When I was a child growing up in Nigeria, my mother was very keen to make me feel that I represented Wales. It was a sort of struggle between my parents to lobby for our allegiance. Every Christmas, I would dress up in my Welsh red clogs and my Welsh hat that we made of cardboard, which was like a top hat, but with a flat top, and it had this frilly trim on the inside. And we made it together, my mom and I. It was one of the few things we did together, actually. And I would stand in front of the whole school and say, Nadol llawen y blwyddyn newydd da. And I was speaking a language I don't speak, representing my ancestors, both living and dead, and providing visibility for myself, yes, but in a way also for my mother. My mother had traveled to Patagonia in the early 60s to trace the path of her ancestors that had left Wales for the reasons that we've just discussed, you know, wanting to keep their Welshness with them. Of course, when they got to South America, they you know, became Argentinian. But she kept really copious records as well of her travels in South America and in North America, and her perspective on civil rights, the civil rights movement in North America, and her reflections on the Welsh in Patagonia, who spoke Spanish and were proud Argentinians in the meantime, always gave me a keen awareness that culture is dynamic, and cultural identity, while important, of course, could be understood as a series of resting places on the way to becoming, and becoming is continuous. It was my mother's complaint that she felt invisible in Nigeria that inspired the film I made. I'm not putting them in order now. This one I made before the one I just showed a clip from, but I wanted to show a clip from it because of this idea of visibility and feeling invisible. So I made a film about a woman of African descent in Germany who feels invisible, because she actually is invisible in the story. It's kind of, it's a kind of magical realism type thing. But it wasn't based on my experience. It was based on my mother's experience. You know, because being a Welsh woman in Nigeria, she would go to work and people would greet her and say, "Oh, hello, Mrs. Olaufe." And she's like, "I'm Mrs. Okpako." "Oh, you look exactly like Mrs. Olaufe." And she's like, "I don't look anything like Kathy Olaufe. I look completely different." But in that context where people are not used to looking at you and seeing people who look like you kind of become invisible. And so it's her sense of invisibility that made me make the film Landing. And I'm just going to show a little bit. I don't know if I'm way over time now showing all these parts, but... This is where she's looking in the mirror and she sees that she's not there. In her case, it's like she puts on a disguise every day to fit in. And it's actually when she finds out that no one can see her anyway that she gives up disguising herself. She wanted to be invisible, but when she realized that she was invisible, then she realized that she wasn't alive anymore. And that, I think, I'm trying to talk about how important it is to be visible and how important it is to be seen, you know, for not necessarily just to be seen, but to be seen for who you are, rather than what other people's, and again, I'm thinking about what Richard Burton said about, you know, Taffy was a Welshman, Taffy was a thief. You know, to be seen for who you are, not what is assigned to you. And how important that is to our existence at all. Okay, so the last one I'm going to talk about, and it's going to need some audience participation about this film. So I'm just trying to prepare the... Okay, sorry about that. So when I read Helen Habila's book, Chibok Girls, that he wrote about the kidnapping of 276 girls from a federal school, a government school in Chibok, which is a collection of villages in the northeast of Nigeria. Helen Habila is a novelist and a journalist, but he wanted to write a book about the Chibok girls incident, kidnapping, when it took place, because he felt so implicated. It was about his own region of the country, and even though he's a professor in George Mason University in Virginia, he felt like he wanted to go and find out what was happening, and so he went there sort of after the girls had been taken and nothing had happened. The government wasn't taking action or couldn't take action or whatever. So he went there and he conducted a series of interviews with who was left behind, which was mostly parents and teachers and people affected by what had taken place. And he made a series of recordings of the interviews that he did and then used those interviews to write the book. And when I approached him, he's a friend, so when I approached him, I said to him, look, I want to make a film about this. Because I'd heard about the process and the process of writing the book, I felt like I wanted to make a film about that, about how he wrote the book. And it fitted into the kind of films that I made, which were mostly personal, about people I knew or was close to, because I felt like that would kind of protect the people themselves, in the sense that whatever I do, I'll do it with love and respect, because they're my friends and they're people I know, and so I don't have the distance to be kind of indifferent. And so this was a situation where I thought, okay, look, I don't know any of the 276 girls that were kidnapped, and I don't know any of their family, and I wouldn't be able to speak authoritatively about any of it, even if I would take a team there, and I wouldn't have the right, to come there and tell that story. I wouldn't be able to. But here's Helen Habila, and he's from there, and he's writing this book. I felt like, okay, this is somewhere I could connect, and I could connect to him as the artist, as the writer. And so he gave me permission to do that. And it came up again with the question of like how to tell this story. So how can I tell this story authentically? Because near truth, you have authenticity. And Helen had already gone to Chibok and visited the parents and the teachers and the girls who escaped, and he had interviewed them and recorded the interviews and transcribed them into a book. I didn't take him back there with a camera and have him and all the interviewees relive the experience. I didn't want to do that. So a reenactment was not on the cards. So we decided to go not to Borno State, but to Gombe State, which is the state next to Borno State. Not to Chibok, but to Kaltungo, which is Helen's own village, small town. And we decided to stage the story there. The significant event for me was Helen choosing to go in search of the story because he empathized with the parents, because he empathized with the girls, because it was close to home. So we decided to take the story home, to his home, and let it be told there. So I cannot tell what happened in Chibok. Those who were there are burdened with the task of telling the world what happened. Every word is scrutinized. Everything has to add up. The time the shooting started, the weather that night, how many girls, how were they transported, what route did the kidnappers take, the pressure to convince the world that something unbelievably horrible really happened. But they didn't want it to have happened. They asked the government to tell another story to make it more bearable. And this is a quote from Helen Habila. Some parents carried out burial rites for their daughters. Some asked the government to declare them dead so they could have a sense of closure. Some parents actually died of frustration and heart disease. Can we make a film about that? Can we make a film about listening, trying to understand how it feels? Can we echo the story with our voices and hear ourselves empathize? Can that be a reason? We asked non-actors to listen to the original interviews and then repeat what they hear in their own words, and we filmed that. By doing that, we're saying we cannot make a film about the Chibok girls. We can only say we want to make a film about the Chibok girls, but we can't, and this is why. So, Boko Haram is this organizer. The clip I'm going to show now is about how the group became sort of radicalized from being a small group of adherents to religious beliefs to kind of armed fighters. And so how that happens according to Helon Habila. So that's the bit I'm going to show. So I just want to say a little bit about what Boko Haram is. So it literally means, Boko means book, and haram means, I couldn't find the correct word, haram, not forbidden, but kind of unclean or bad. So Western education is bad. So it's a kind of anti-colonial movement in a funny way, but it's warlike. So that bookness of the film, I wanted it to play out. I wanted it, because films are also texts. Like we write with pictures and we make signs and meanings onto themselves. So the film images it's a text. And what does reading words and seeing images actually do with us, with our minds? I wanted to sort of interrogate that process of being literate. We're film literate, we're literate. I have an uncle who's died now, my father's also passed away, but who never learned to read and write, and who lived into his 90s and never learned to read and write. So what is a mind that doesn't read words like, as compared to one that is literate? And I wanted to meditate on that. I also wanted to meditate on participation. Like when you watch a film, you feel as if you're over there and the film is over here and it's happening over there to other people and it has nothing to do with you. But is there a way to be part of a film, to embody it in a way, to voice it, to participate in it with your voice and therefore with your body? And can that bring a type of empathy that is different from the empathy you get from this kind of distant spectatorship situation? So those are the questions we were asking. So that's why we made the film the way we made it. But and also afterwards, we wanted it to be a film that the audience takes part in. So I just wanted to give you an example of it by maybe we do it. I'll show a scene, and it's got excerpts from the book in cursive. And if we pass some microphones around, if you want to, you can participate. Otherwise, you can just pass it on to the next person. And we just have the sentences from the book read out loud. Would you be down to do that? You want to try it? Just see how it feels? Okay. Do we have some microphones somewhere? Okay, and this is the last thing we're going to do, so I won't go on and on. What am I like for time, Tanya? Am I good?
10 minutes.
Okay, it's not even going to be that long. All right, so where's the microphones? Are they ready? Are they out? They're going around? Okay, and then can you manage the volume from up there? Okay, so actually I had 2 clips, but I guess I can't show the other one. This is the second clip. I'll start with the other one. Okay. So this is the one where you participate. So like I said, he's writing the book and he's reading it. He's reading back to himself what he's written. And so we're going to hear the last bit where he's describing how the group became radicalized. It's not going to be super exact here, but if the microphones are going around, when you see text in cursive, those are excerpts from the book. And those you should read out loud.
Shoot us with their guns. This is my explanation. We will no longer listen to anyone. Their time is up. We will no longer accept invitations for mediation from anyone. We will not accept the shooting of 20 of our members, and we will not let it go, and we will not listen to anyone anymore. Here we have the beginning of the narrative of victimhood and persecution that Boko Haram will adopt. In those early days, the group was scrupulous in explaining its motives after every attack. It even had a chief information officer, Abu Kwaka, who sent out emails and gave interviews to claim credit for attacks or to correct perceived false representations of the group. The response to Yusuf's declaration of war was immediate. In Maiduguri, 2 sect members, Hassan Sani Balami and Isa Vega Goza, decided to make a bomb and blow up public buildings. In Bauchi, Boko Haram members attacked a police station and tried unsuccessfully to break into the armory to take weapons. Before the week was out, the uprising was spread to parts of Yobe and Kano states, where police stations, government buildings, and prisons were attacked. As the fighting escalated, military reinforcements were sent to Maiduguri. Tanks rolled into Markaz Ibn Taymiyyah, the mosque where Boko Haram members had barricaded themselves. Yusuf somehow escaped, but he was eventually discovered in his father-in-law's house, hiding in the goat pen. Videos of his interrogation, still available on YouTube, show him surrounded by policemen, looking calm and alert and confidently defending himself. Hours later, he will be dead, killed as he tried to escape, according to the government. There are pictures that show his bullet-riddled body still in handcuffs. Before he was killed, you should have been here on a Friday, a former follower of Yusuf said. You would think a big party was going on here. The whole area will be lined by exotic cars as very powerful individuals went to see Yusuf. They went in cars with tinted glasses, so nobody will be able to see them. But today, driving down a bumpy, dusty road toward Markaz Ibn Taymiyyah, it was hard to imagine the pomp and glory.
Yusuf had presided over a vibrant community of... He was spiritual leader as well as judge and benefactor to his followers. He settled disputes and arranged marriages. There were madrasas run on strict Islamic code and a welfare system that provided microfinance and health care to its members.
It was, as the cliche goes, a government within a government.
Yusuf's stated aim was to create a parallel society, free of what he considered the corrupting influence of democracy, Western education, and Western ways of life.
After Yusuf's execution, the government declared Boko Haram crushed. That was not the case.
A year later, Boko Haram re-emerged under a new leader, Abubakar. He married Yusuf's widow and adopted his children, taking over his household and his mission.
Oh my God, that sounded so good. I wish I could have seen the whole film like that. Okay. I have one more clip, but it could be done too.
Oh, yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah?
We'll jump questions.
No. Then I'm stopping. So I would like to say thank you so much for listening. I don't know if it was all over the place, but I tried to give you an impression. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, Branwen. I didn't want to stop more clips. I was enjoying them too much.
No. It was too much.
Well, I mean, maybe the only person in the world who can take us from Mader Davi station to Boko Haram. And, you did exactly what I was hoping, in a sense, giving a sense of the scope of your work. But also, a lot of emphasis you had there, an emphasis on the framing of things, who's allowed to see things. You talked about film as a matter of persuading someone of a point of view. And although, as you mentioned, a lot of us are bilingual, the discussions about ethnicity and race tend to come to us from an Anglophone culture, right? Especially the United States. Whereas your work actually bypasses that, and engages with questions of multiculturalism, how that plays out in Germany, the meaning of diversity is culturally specific in a sense. What it means in Welsh language culture is different to Anglophone culture in itself. What it means in Germany is different to what it means in Nigeria. What it means in California is different to what it meant in Germany. I wonder whether you want to just talk a little bit about that, just in terms of how the themes that clearly connect your work, questions of perspective, of diversity, of documenting, how that changes according to the space in which you occupy at different times in your career.
Thank you. It's that thing in the description. It says the audience is both the pilot and the passenger, and that's what it is. We come to cinema with our perspectives and our experiences, and everything we see it through our own lens and our own way. So we are the pilot. Even when we're watching someone else's film, we are the pilot. We are directing ourselves. We see what we see. Look at me excavating in Cleopatra for somebody who looks like me, and then I found out that she's the one who carried the story to the next generation at the end. So, and that's why she's the main character to me, even though nobody can remember her at all. So that means that everybody sees the world the way they see it, depending on their own experience, but you're also a passenger because you're carried by culture, you've got prejudices that you don't even know why you have them or where they came from. You've had that all put in. So that situation is the same for everybody in the world. Whether you're in Wales or whether you're in California or wherever you are in that condition of being, part of things, but also not part of things, of everything, And I think that us as people of color, we might have grown up watching Hollywood movies and complain, I never see anybody who looks like me, and when I do, they're being demeaned or they're being made fun of or something like that. And other people might think, well, I'm a white male. I'm always Matt Damon, and I'm always on Mars, you know, and I can handle it. But deep down inside, you know, I'm not like Matt Damon. If I was on Mars, I wouldn't do that. That's not me. That isn't me. So I'm there, but I'm not there. So I think that this invisibility situation, this representation thing, this symbolic being there and not being there, it's something we all have in common. And I think by being specific, you become more universal somehow. If you can really be specific about the real intricacies, honestly as possible, of whatever conflict you are, that's when everybody gets it, funnily enough. It's almost like looking, because cinema, when you teach cinema, you always want you teach your students how to make things clear easily. Like, you only have a few minutes, so you've got to make it clear, who's this person? Are they a good guy or a bad guy? Well, by the way they dress, by the way they stand, you know, quickly you want to be able to see it. But in actual fact, the more complex you make it, you know, the more uniquely that thing you make it, the more it's possible to identify with, I think. And therefore, it doesn't matter where you are.
No, no.
The story is kind of always there.
Well, yeah, you're elaborating on what you said very powerfully. And you know, what's interesting about your work is that actually you have occupied different cultural spaces and speak from them and about them in different ways.